Okay, everybody, welcome to this discussion, U.S. presidents on the Jews and Israel. Looking at quotations from U.S. presidents from the earliest period of this country's history uh, provides us with a very telling glimpse into what was really behind the creation of this country, who it was actually created for. I did a presentation somewhat on this topic before called I think it was called "The U.S. Israel's Greatest Whore" or something like that. Um, but anyway, um, so some of these quotes I'm going to be looking at are repeats from those set of notes, but I've also got a lot of new ones. But what I want to do is look at presidents from Washington right on up to Truman, and then later we're going to pick up with Truman and carry the thing more into modern times. But there was a big transition that took place about that time from Truman on, um, where this country became more obviously Jew ass licking than ever. It always was, but it did so, more subtly in the background. But ever since Truman, the ass licking became more obvious for several reasons. Number one, the state of Israel was created. But also, number two, they felt that the public had been so sufficiently dumbed down now that they could more openly become Jewish and have their administrations infested with Jews. Oh, we had administrations that had quite a few Jews before that, right? The fucking Lincoln administration was infested with them. But not so openly. Some of those Jews, the names didn't sound Jewish. You didn't have Bergs and Steens and this man and that man. But with Truman, a big shift. Yeah, you did start having, the names weren't changed or they weren't so crypto sounding that they were confusing and murky. You weren't sure. Uh, with Truman on, and we'll be looking at that later, the names were blatantly Jewish and in great numbers. So yeah, and that's one of the reasons why people think that America only started kissing Israel's ass in more recent decades. A big shift had taken place. No, no, the only shift is that you know it became more obvious. But beneath the surface, this has always been the case. Again, this is what this country was fucking created for, right? Going back to Francis Bacon and his New Atlantis. He made it clear that this Ben Salem colony that the Brits were to establish, son of Jerusalem, would serve that function. That would be its sole function. That the king of Ben Salem, i.e., the president of the United States, would be answerable to the king of Jerusalem. Once Israel is established, the king of Jerusalem or the prime minister would be the boss, and that the head of this colony, Ben Salem, i.e., the United States, would kiss Israel's ass. That would be its function, and that it would assist in bringing about this global paradise, Jewish paradise. George Washington said in his diary shortly after the Revolutionary War, "What we have established here is an empire in its infancy, and one day it will engulf the world." Holy fucking shit. Exactly in line with what Bacon had written. And of course, Washington was what? A high ranking fucking Mason, a Grand Master. Anyways, so let's start with George Washington. What did he have to say about the Jews? Washington wrote a letter. Actually, he didn't write it. Uh, his handler wrote it on his behalf, but he certainly endorsed all that was in it. And who was his handler? Don't forget, Mr. Jewboy himself, Alexander Hamilton, wrote this letter. to the Sephardic congregation of Newport, Rhode Island. Um, I've been there numerous times. It's the oldest still running synagogue in the United States, from whence they ran the physical um, triangle trade. The slave trade. It was financially run out of Charleston, South Carolina, but the physical uh, angle of it, actually, sending the ships out and having them come back, that was all run out of Rhode Island, out of Newport, specifically from uh, the Toro Synagogue. They even have one of the kingpin leaders of the whole operation buried there. Um, what the hell is his name now? Sephardic bastard. Shit, his name escapes me. Aaron Lopez. That's it. I had to pause for a minute and think. Yeah, Aaron Lopez is. As soon as you walk in the gate, it's like the first stone right there on the left. So anyway, Hamilton had written this speech for Washington when he went down to give a talk there in August of 1790. And in the course of this speech, he thanked them for their handsome contributions toward the fight for independence. Yeah. Whose independence? Anyway, here's what he said. May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in the land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants who are going to kiss your ass. While everyone shall sit safely under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. Yeah, well, when a Jew sits under a fig tree, it's because he employed Goyim or enslaved Goyim to do his work on his vineyard on his behalf. But when he says, none shall make you afraid, yeah, because everyone here is going to fall for the freedom, justice, and liberty for all bullshit, meaning they're going to roll the red carpet out for you to come here and rape and pillage them. And when people start catching on, a very few of them anyway, to the fact that Jews are fucking everything up, you'll be able to say, you're not a true American. You don't believe in freedom, justice, and liberty. And you must be a bigot. You're an anti-Semite. This is what Washington was saying. You're not going to be thrown out of this country like you were in European countries. You're going to have free reign to engage in your crimes here. We established this country on your behalf. Washington once confessed to a clergyman his desire to retire from the military, stating, quote, I shall quit the helm with as much satisfaction and retire to a private station with as much content as ever the wearied pilgrim felt upon his safe arrival in the Holy Land or haven of hope. Funny how he had to use that analogy, right? That was always on his mind. Washington possessed a copy of a 1785 sermon, a favorite of his, entitled The United States Elevated to Glory and Honor, which was based around Deuteronomy 26:19, which says, to make thee high above all nations. This is Yahweh talking to his little precious chosen pets, telling them that he wanted to make them high above all the nations, to exalt them infinitely above all the other nations, in name and in honor, and that thou mayest be a holy people unto the Lord thy God. This was the focus of this entire sermon, and it was Washington's most favorite of sermons. Why do you suppose that was? It's been this nation's job from the word go to make Israel high above all nations, so that it can't be held accountable for anything it does. And to prove that that's what we've been doing all along, all you have to do is look at votes taken at the UN Security Council over the years, and see how the entire world voted against Israel again and again and again, primarily because of its abuse of the Palestinians, right? And yet, the world opinion meant nothing because the U.S. stepped in. The only country that voted in favor of, well, for the most part, there were a couple others here and there because they wanted some fucking favor or something. But for the most part, it was just the U.S. and Israel voting on behalf of Israel. And Israel skated every fucking time because the U.S. has vetoing power. This sermon looked forward to a future age of glory of the Christian church, marked by the great success of the newly established United States, and, more significantly, how this new era would entail the restoration of the Jewish homeland in Israel. That's what this sermon was all about. Washington loved this sermon. It was his favorite. The only one he kept a personal copy of in his belongings, because he knew that that was the mission appointed to him and this entire country, to set up Jewland for his little Jewish tribe. Fucking unreal, man. This sermon was preached by the president of Yale College, Dr. Ezra Stiles, before Washington's friend, the governor of Connecticut, Jonathan Trumbull. In his sermon, Stiles wrote this: Moses and the prophets, by divine direction, interspersed their writings with promises that God would recover and gather Israel from all the nations. Then the words of Moses, hitherto accomplished, but in part, will be literally fulfilled when this branch of the prosperity of Abraham shall be nationally collected and become a very distinguished and glorious people. Talking about the United States. We're going to be the ones to bring this about. God promised Israel that land, and we are going to be the ones, the glorious nation that brings Israel to its full glory. In other words, we're glorious, but they're even more glorious, and our purpose will be to bring them to their full fruition of glory, and that will be our glory to do that. He went on to say, I have assumed the text as introductory to a discourse upon the political welfare of God's American Israel. Just like you had British Israel, American Israel as well. And as elusively prophetic of the future prosperity and splendor of the United States. So our future prosperity and splendor will all hinge around what we do for Israel. Remember, Abraham said, I will bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. So God is going to bless this nation as long as we bless Israel. And this was Washington's favorite sermon. This masterpiece of propaganda mentioned, quote, the prosperity of Abraham shall be nationally collected. It also said the political welfare of God's American Israel, the future prosperity and splendor of the United States, was all dependent around us kissing Israel's ass. And if you don't, why, we'll impose a boycott, right? An international Jewish boycott. You'll go under overnight unless you lick our ass. So it only makes sense that you do so. Fucking unbelievable. Washington, writing to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, well, Hamilton writing on his behalf, said that the new American government, quote, gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. In other words, you don't have to worry, my fellow Jew boys, in this country like you had to worry in Europe, because people were wise to you and stood up against you. You don't have to worry about us becoming bigoted against you here. You don't have to worry about persecution, i.e., being held accountable for your crimes. In this country, we're going to roll the fucking red carpet out for you. And later, when we establish Jewland for you, or greatly assist you with it, you can commit terrorist attacks against officials representing this country, and we won't go after you. You can mass murder the native inhabitants of Palestine to make way for yourselves, and we're going to make sure that you can get away with it and that no one else will step in to stop you. That's what he had in mind when he said this shit. He further stated to this congregation that he was without prejudice toward the potential workmen, regardless of their religious beliefs, whether they may be Mohammedans, Jews, or Christians of any sect, or whether they be atheists. He meant, the workmen who were building this nation, right? They won the war at this point, the staged fucking Masonic war, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. And now he said we have to engage in the work of building this country up now. Building it up for who? On whose behalf? I don't care if you're Mohammedans, Jews, Christians. Notice he had to make this all inclusive, right? Did he really care, though, about Mohammedans and Christians? Fuck no. But by mixing them all in there with Jews, it made it out like he's not singling anybody out specifically. But he was, wasn't he? Of course he was. When he told them, you don't have to worry about bigotry and persecution here, my fellow Jews. It was all about them guys. He then wrote, or he then said, and because Hamilton wrote it, which he was in total agreement with, may the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants. In other words, those who are going to lick your ass and pay your usurious debts and support your fucking piece of shit country after we help establish it. Like the Christian Zionists who will be your biggest cheerleaders. While everyone shall sit, he said, in safety under his own vine and fig tree, none to make him afraid. You won't have to be afraid in fear of anything here. We're going to protect you. We're going to coddle your ass. Why, future presidents are going to pass laws to make it illegal for anyone to speak against your crimes. In the last part of this excerpt, Washington was quoting from Micah 4:4, a prophetic passage that applies to Israel's alleged future glory. In doing this, he was writing as one Jew would write to another, which, again, Hamilton wrote it, but Washington was a crypto, absolutely. Very disturbing indeed. A similar disturbing statement was written on Washington's behalf by Hamilton to the Hebrew congregation of Savannah, Georgia, a speech which he delivered on May 2nd of 1790, in which he said, may the same wonder-working deity, the prick in the sky called Yahweh, may the same wonder-working deity who long since delivering the Hebrews from their Egyptian oppressors, who were the real oppressors, and planted them in the promised land, whose providential agency has lately been conspicuous in establishing these United States as an independent nation, still continue to water them with the dews of heaven, and to make the inhabitants of every denomination participate in the temporal and spiritual blessings of that people whose God is Jehovah or Yahweh. Did you catch that? May everyone who's a member of every denomination, meaning all religious disciplines, right? May they all welcome you with open arms and participate in the temporal and spiritual blessings of that people whose God is Jehovah, meaning the Jews. May everyone of every denomination, it's not going to be like it was in Europe, where, a lot of lay Catholics and Protestants alike couldn't stand you criminal fucks and did something about your crimes, went about it in the wrong way, didn't go after the head of the snake, but nevertheless, at least recognized who the enemy was. And even though they didn't go after the head of the snake, whenever there was an expulsion, the elite Jews had to walk on eggshells and be very careful, right? For a time, anyway. And so Washington was saying it's not going to be that way here. None of the Christians or the Mohammedans or whatever are going to rise up against you in this country because we believe in freedom and justice and liberty for all. Washington also wrote to the Hebrew congregations of Philadelphia, New York City, Charleston, and Richmond. Again, Hamilton wrote it. In December of 1790, and he gave this same address to all of them. It was the same speech that he used for all of these congregations. He said, the liberal sentiment toward each other, which marks every political and religious denomination of men in this country, stands unrivaled in the history of nations. Yeah, unrivaled, because we've never had a situation where people were compelled, intimidated, coerced, deceived into thinking that they have to accept Jews as much as anyone else. Jews are included in this mix. You will not be persecuted. You will not be kicked out. And the government will defend you at every step of the way to bullshit people in the media, beginning with newspapers then, and, when radio and TV came along, continuing it on even a grander scale, bullshitting the public with propaganda so that every Jew crime could be covered up, diverted, made it look like, it was just a bad trend in the economy, some bad investments were made, or whatever, But not by Jews. No, it had nothing to do with Jews. And if you say that, you're an anti-Semite, you're not a true American, you don't believe in freedom, justice, liberty for all, blah, 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 blah. This is what Washington meant when he said this. It's what Hamilton meant when he wrote it, and what Washington meant when he gave this speech. The power and goodness of the Almighty, he said, were strongly manifested in the events of our late glorious revolution. Did you catch that? The American Revolution was about what? About the power and goodness of the Almighty, which were strongly manifested in the events of the revolution. Yeah, because the whole thing was a script that was being followed, right? A Masonic script, a Judeo-Masonic script. And his kind interposition in our behalf has been no less visible in the establishment of our present equal government. Equal meaning we're going to be protective of your interests, my fellow Jews. Not like it's been with other countries where the royal bloodline, at least to appease the masses, had to take some action against Jews, low-level Jews. That's not going to happen here at all. You guys don't have to worry anymore now. Not only are we going to protect your interests here, but down the line, as we become a great empire, we're going to make sure that no other country will interfere with your interests either. He went on to say, may the same temporal and eternal blessing which you implore for the rest of your congregations be endowed upon all of us, So there you go. We're all in this together now. We're one universal brotherhood. But by that he meant, we're all in this together on your behalf. We're just not going to talk about it. We're going to do it behind the scenes, but we're not going to talk about it. We don't want people to catch on what's really going on here. But we all know we're all in on the gag here amongst ourselves, aren't we, Jewish congregations? This country was created for you. It's what he's saying here. How touching. In Genesis chapter 49, Jacob, the father of Israel, his name was later changed to Israel, had blessed his sons, and thus the nation of Israel. Likewise, Washington, the father of the United States, if you will, blessed the new nation as he took his oath of office as president. As he took this oath, he kissed the Bible, a Masonic Bible at that, which was open to, you guessed it, Genesis chapter 49, where this passage is. In several of his personal letters, Washington continually referred to the U.S. as an asylum for the persecuted, meaning the Jews. Quite obviously, he was referring specifically, entirely to them in these instances. Here's a few excerpts from such letters of his. On one occasion, he wrote, making this country not only an asylum for the oppressed of every nation, every Jew from every nation who comes here to find sanction and safety to engage in, their crimes, but a desirable residence, he said, for the virtuous and industrious of every country. Virtuous and industrious Jews. He was referring specifically to them. And, even though people did come from every walk of life and from every country, he was, in fact, referring, though, specifically here to Jews. On another occasion, he wrote, the Western country, meaning the U.S., which promises to afford a capacious asylum for the poor and persecuted of the earth. Again, Jews. Here's another excerpt along this line from another letter. We trust the Western world will yet verify the predictions of its friends and prove an asylum for the persecuted of all nations. He's talking about Jews specifically. What the hell do you think he meant by verifying the predictions of its friends? It's Jewish friends. He's talking about the prophecies that Jews will come from all walks of life, and God will restore them to glory, give them back their homeland through this country. He knew that this country would be the main mover and shaker, not only in establishing the nation of Israel. It began with the Brits, but the U.S. stepped in and became the main leader of it. But in preserving, protecting that nation from others wanting to attack it and wipe it off the fucking map as it should be, right? He knew that the U.S. would be instrumental more than any other country in licking ass of that country and seeing to it that nobody could pose a threat thereto. Needs to be pointed out that the word federal comes from the Latin word foedus, which means covenant. The federal government, the covenant government. Our government that made a covenant with the chosen ones to protect them. That was its main aim in its creation, guys. Moving on to John Adams, the second president of the United States. He had an equal admiration for the people of the book, as he called them, and many have called them that over the centuries. The people of the book, meaning the fucking Bible, that piece of shit collection of literary trash. This became a slogan among the early Jewish nationalists John Adams also stated, quote, "They, the Jews, are the most glorious nation that ever inhabited this earth. Uh, the Romans and their empire were but a bauble in comparison with the Jews." Did you catch that? The Romans were but a bauble in comparison to this greatest of all nations, the Jews. He was even exalting them above the United States when he said that, right? That they were the greatest of all nations on earth, greater than this nation, too, because this nation was created to advance Israel to glory. Here's another related statement from Mr. Adams. "Throughout history, Jews have influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, ancient or modern." Well, unfortunately, he's right, isn't he? They have influenced the affairs of mankind more than any other nation, and more happily so. Yes, it made them very happy that they could weasel their way into kings' courts and get the kings, if they weren't Jews already, they became Jewified with the big shekel handouts they got from them to advance their interests while fucking everyone else in the process. Yes, they have been the most influential in the affairs of nations, haven't they? "We Jews are behind all your wars." Fucking unreal, man. In a letter to Thomas Jefferson, John Adams wrote, "I will insist that the Hebrews have done more to civilize man than any other nation." Really now? Is that what you call it? Civilizing? The instigators of war after endless war, since thousands of years ago, across hundreds of nations, uh, all through history. Every fucking war, the major ones and the minor ones, they had their hand in. If they didn't start it, and they started almost all of them, but the few that they didn't start, they made sure they had their hand in there to ensure that the war would drag on longer, to kill more goyim, and to line their pockets with more cash as they financed them, and worked it out so that the end result of the war worked in their favor every time. Interestingly, the original proposal for the design of the Great Seal of the United States, submitted by John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, called for the depiction of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea with Pharaoh in pursuit of Moses standing on the other side. That was to be on one of the sides of the Great Seal, that depiction. Remember, I talked about how, the Puritans likened themselves to the new Israel, British Israelitism, right? Coming across the Red Sea, i.e., the Atlantic, to the new promised land, what became the United States. So, yeah, here it was. A century plus later, and they wanted to memorialize that theme on the Great Seal, because that's what they viewed the United States as, right? The new Israel. Yeah. Don't forget, New York was originally called New Amsterdam. Why? Because it was to be their new banking haven established there, which was once in Amsterdam, right? Their main banking haven. And the motto was to have been on the Great Seal: "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God." In their version, a tyrant is anyone who didn't lick their ass, which is why they wanted the kingly line eviscerated, right? Through their revolutions. And that's what they did. They got rid of the kingly line, didn't they? Even though they were all Jews or crypto Jews, they wanted to get rid of them because they were in their way, just like the church was in their way, the priestly line. Anyway, In a letter to Reverend F.A. Vanderkemp, John Adams wrote of the influence of the Jews on Western nations, saying, quote, I will insist that the Hebrews have done more to civilize man than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe uh, that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. So you see, this is the secular mind now. This is how the secular Jewish mind works. Even though they don't care about religion, about Moses or whatever, they still take pride in those holy books because to them it represents Jewish dominance over the world for the past umpteen thousand years, right? And, it's in that book, the Holy Bible, where the dream was first laid out on paper, or on papyrus or papyrus. The dream for world domination, where Yahweh said, I will give you all the nations. They will come before you and bow before you and lick the dust of the soul, from the soles of thy feet. So even secular Jews love that shit. Even the third faction loves that part of the Torah. They hate the Torah because of its, 10 commandments. They don't want any moral standards of any kind to get in their way. But they do love those statements that take pride in that. Anyway, he went on to say, if I were an atheist of the other sect who believe or pretend to believe that all is ordered by chance, I should believe that chance had ordered the Jews to preserve and propagate to all mankind the doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty sovereign of the universe. Even if I didn't believe in that God, I would at least recognize that that God is the most intelligent, the most wise, almighty sovereign of the universe. The way he's portrayed in that book. The most supreme. Really? The mass murdering psychopath who said kill everything that breathes, including young suckling infants? That God? Jesus fucking Christ, man. He went on to say, which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality and consequently of civilization. Yahweh is the great principle of all morality. Holy fucking shit. Burn the town with all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a burnt offering unto the Lord, said Mr. Yahweh. And this is the essential principle of all morality. Fucking unreal. Remember the story of Elisha in the Old Testament, right? Where he's walking down the street and a group of 40 young boys are calling him Baldy. And so he was offended by that. And it says, in the name of the Lord, he called 2 she-bears out of the woods who mauled all 40 of them, mauled them to death, just because they called him Baldy. And we must assume when we read that story that that was Yahweh's hand at work there, because that's how he magically called the bears out of the woods. And since he was a great man of God, God would not have allowed his little magic trick to have transpired, even if he did it on his own without Yahweh's divine help. If he, was a magician, it doesn't matter, right? According to the story, this was done by a man of God with Yahweh's approval, if not Yahweh's direct power. Whether Yahweh did the magic trick for him or he did the magic trick of his own power, he was a man of God, so it had to be Yahweh ultimately at least approving of this, right? This is the great God of morality that Adams was talking about here. Moral my fat fucking ass. And isn't it disgusting that they have a great many Gentiles falling for that shit now? In fact, more Gentiles fall for that shit God than fucking Jews. Far more. Anyway, here's a few more quotes from Adams. I really wish the Jews again in Judea, an independent nation, for, as I believe, the most enlightened men of it have participated in the amelioration of the philosophy of the age. They deserve to have their homeland restored to them. I really wish, he said, Jews again in Judea, an independent nation. I really wish it. We all wish it, don't we, our fellow brother Masons out there? Our fellow crypto Jews out there. Yes, 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 yes. And we're going to use the tax dollars we siphon out of the people of this country to support that cause. Suckers! We have you convinced that this is a free country, but we're going to pilfer you. Not now, we can't get away with it right away. But down the line, we're going to establish a central bank. Why, we already have the early stages of one right here, don't we? The first bank of the United States. Ultimately, that bank or another like it is going to siphon you through an income tax we're going to impose on all of you. And yet you fought the Revolutionary War against taxation without representation, suckers. This was all going through his mind as he said shit like this. He also once wrote, I wish your nation, the Jewish people, may be admitted to all privileges of citizens in every country of the world, i.e., eventually, with help from this country, we're going to see to it that all nations roll the red carpet out for you so you can commit your crimes and get away with it. And anyone who questions you, who even looks at you funny, will be arrested for anti-Semitism. This is what he was envisioning when he wrote this. Well, here we are, aren't we? He also once wrote, Father, I could find it in my heart to wish that you had been at the head of 100,000 Israelites and marching with them into Judea and making a conquest of that country and restoring your nation to the domination of it. Wow. He's talking here about, the initial march of Akhenaten leading the expelled Hyksos to Jewland and to dominate that land. Dominate! That's the word he used here. Dominate. They did. And how did they do it? With help from the sea peoples that they hired to do their slaughtering for them, to drive out the native inhabitants or to murder them, the ones that they didn't drive out, so that they could inherit it and dominate it. For I really wish, he went on to say, I really wish the Jews again in Judea an independent nation. He said this on numerous occasions. This sounds so much like a statement made by President Bill Clinton. The August 2nd, 2002 New York Post quoted him as saying, I would fight and die for Israel. Remember that, guys? He actually said that. I would fight and die for Israel. How precious. I don't recall him ever saying he would fight and die for this country, for the people of this country. No, but he would fight and die for Israel. What he really means by that, though, is I would send the people of this country in a heartbeat, in an instant, over to fight for Israel. He's not going to fucking go over there himself. Jews never have fought on behalf of their causes, have they? Almost never. No, they like to send Goyim to do their fighting for them. Anyway, near the end of his life, Adams also said, I really wish the Jews again in Judea an independent nation. He said this same thing on multiple occasions. Let's move on now to Mr. Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was pen pals with Mordecai Manuel Noah. He was a Zionist extraordinaire of his day, even though the word Zionist wasn't yet coined. In one letter to him, he remarked that the suffering of the Jews was proof of the universal spirit of religious intolerance, and that the laws of the U.S. had supplied, quote, the only antidote of this vice. Really, it's a vice for people to stand up against Jewish criminality. But don't worry, my Jewish buddies. In this country, that's not going to happen. And we're going to see to it eventually that it doesn't happen in any other nation anymore either. We, this country, are the antidote to that vice. Listen to all of these presidents licking Jew ass, baby. It's been this way from the word go. It didn't just come about in 1948. No, it's always been this way. But, it wasn't emblazoned on the evening news or on the front pages of the newspapers, so people didn't catch on. The real modus operandi of our politicians from the word go. Jefferson went on to advise Noah that this sect, meaning the Jewish religion, this sect must pay attention to education and make its members good at science to exhibit them as equal objects of respect and favor. Can you say Albert fucking Einstein? Einstein was exalted to this high status as a great thinker. Why, the greatest thinker in physics, right? When in fact, as we've seen, Einstein was a fucking fraud. He was a plagiarist. All his ideas were not his own. He stole them. Everything he ever talked about, he ever wrote, that he became famous for, relativity and on, wasn't his creation. He stole them from other scientists like Poincaré, right? Stole it. They put him up on a pedestal when he didn't deserve it. And why? Because he was a fucking Jew. They had to make Jews out to look like they're the best at everything. That's what he was saying here, Mr. Thomas Jefferson. He was telling them, you must pay attention to education and make its members, i.e. Jews, make them good at science. Make them, even if they're not good. Make them look good. Put them up on a pedestal. Give them a name when they don't even deserve it. Einstein was challenged on numerous occasions to enter into debates with other scientists of his day. He refused to do so. He never once conceded to a debate because he couldn't defend his position, number one. And number two, he didn't even fucking know half of what he was talking about. They weren't his ideas. He probably didn't even write his fucking papers, guys. He had somebody else, a goddamn ghostwriter, do it for him. But in any case, he was a fraud. And but in the thinking of most people today, Jew and Gentile alike, he was the greatest of all scientists. Interestingly, though, he was once asked, how does it feel to be, the greatest scientist? And he said, I wouldn't know. Ask Tesla. Interestingly. Anyway, upon receiving a letter from a Jewish doctor in Georgia, Jefferson replied that he was, quote, happy in the restoration of the Jews, particularly to their social rights. Wow. That was what made him happy about the founding of this country, that the Jews now were restored to their social rights. In this country now, they can engage in government, in finance, in business, and not have to worry about prejudicial exclusions. And look where we're at today because of that. Jefferson further expressed his desire that the Jews in the United States, quote, will be seen taking their seats on the benches of science as preparatory to their doing the same at the board of government. Wow. Establish yourself first as great scientists so people will look up to you and respect you, so that when you start to enter politics, they'll think, well, this is a good thing because they've demonstrated how smart they are in science. So they must be smart in other areas like politics too. They can be trusted. And besides, this is the land of the free for all people. So we have to accept them like everyone else. And if we don't, we're not true Americans. Look at this horse shit, guys. Right from the word go. This was the foundation this country was built on. James Madison licked their ass as well. On the occasion of the 1818 consecration of Temple Sharif Israel in New York, James Madison, addressing Mordecai Manuel Noah, the same Zio bastard that Jefferson licked ass with, delivered a discourse in which he stated, quote, "I observe with pleasure the view that you give of the spirit in which your sect, Judaism, partake of the blessings offered by our government and laws." Wow. The blessings that you receive. I am particularly enamored over that. I'm excited over that. The blessings that you receive. Yeah, because it was only really meant for them, right? Freedom and justice for them to engage in their sleazy business fucking practices, their sleazy wheeling and dealing in politics, so that everything works in their fucking favor and nobody can speak out against it, because this is the land of freedom and justice for all. John Quincy Adams was no exception. He wrote to, once again, Mordecai Manuel Noah. Look how many of our presidents in the early days licked ass on this Zio bastard. He wrote to him that he believed in the, quote, rebuilding of Judea as an independent nation. That was the aim early on. I did a series of videos a while back called Fetal Zionism, where I talked about how, beginning early in the 19th century, there was a big push here as well, but primarily at that stage in Britain, to create the state of Israel, right? They were hoping to get that son of a bitch up and running, early on, right? Didn't work out, though. Didn't quite work out. That had to take 2 world wars to finally bring it about. Anyway, Martin Van Buren was another one. In 1840, Jews in Damascus murdered a monk, leading to the torture and displacement of many local Jews. American Jews petitioned Van Buren to do something on their behalf. As a result, Van Buren, through his Secretary of State, wrote to the American minister in Turkey with orders to, quote, prevent and mitigate these horrors. Again, there was the United States intervening very early on behalf of Jews. It wasn't just to protect their interests here, but to see to it that their interests were protected abroad so that they would not be held accountable for their fucking crimes. The crime that they initially committed, right? Their murder of a monk, that wasn't the problem. The problem was people rising up against the Jews for the murder of that monk. And anyone who protested, who participated in this rising up against the Jews, they were the ones in the wrong. The murder of the monk was not addressed here by Mr. Van Buren. And so it's always been, guys. At the UN, when the U.S. voted in favor of Israel so it could skate with its vetoing power, the rest of the world was opposed to Israel for its mass murdering of the Palestinians. But there was our government to see that Israel skated every fucking time. Anyway, the letter avowed that American institutions needed to, quote, place on the same footing the worshippers of God of every faith and form, acknowledging no distinction between the Mohammedan, the Jew, and the Christian. Notice, he had to throw the Mohammedan and the Christian thing in there, but he really didn't mean it. He just meant it for Jews, right? And so, by showing fairness to them, that meant that you had to ignore the fact that Jews killed this fucking monk? That's literally what it meant. Forget that Jews did this. You're singling them out. You're being prejudiced against them. We don't allow it in this country, and we don't want it to be allowed in your country either. And if you don't give in to this demand to be fair to the Jews, then we're going to impose sanctions on you or whatever, right? The U.S. was doing this shit way back then. Millard Fillmore was another one. And you can bet all presidents made statements like this, but, a lot of them have not survived to our day or didn't make it out to the general public. I'm sure they're still filed away somewhere. Millard Fillmore objected to a clause discriminating against Jews from a treaty with Switzerland, writing Congress and saying that, quote, "It is quite certain that neither by law nor by treaty nor by any other official proceedings is it competent for the government of the United States to establish any distinction between its citizens founded on differences in religious beliefs." Again, this was in reference specifically to fucking Jews. Exclusively, in fact, to fucking Jews. Anyway, this looks like a good place to stop here. I'll have to do this in 2 parts. Lots more to come, guys. And like I said, we're going to continue this up until Mr. Truman. Not that there weren't presidents that, didn't lick ass after him. Of course there were. But I'm only covering these because it was up to Truman that, most Americans haven't realized that Jew ass licking went on with previous presidents. They thought that began with Truman and the creation of the State of Israel. So that's why I'm just focusing on this period. But later, we're going to look at how every president from Truman on up stacked their administration with fucking Jews galore, so much so that there really weren't any other people other than Jews represented in their cabinets. It's fucking astonishing, man. Most Americans, even the ones that are aware that this government in recent decades has been licking Jew ass, licking Israel's ass, they're not even aware at how thoroughly one administration after another from Truman on has been absolutely infested with these fucking vermin, man. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. We'll catch you in part 2. Take care.